So welcome to the Behavioural Based Interviewing podcast, which is being delivered today and presented on by the People Organisational Development team. So I've got Kevin with me.
Hello.
And I've got Christian with me.
Hello.
And I'm Helen. So you've got some of the team today. So we're going to be talking about behavioural based interviewing, which, to give you a little bit of context, for the university, this is the area that we have moved into but want to do a lot more of. So the purpose behind this podcast is to give you all a little bit of an idea about what behavioural based interviewing is. It's sometimes called values based interviewing as well, but we're going to be calling it behavioural based interviewing, and we're going to look at exploring the topic as such, and then the benefits of your behavioural based interviews, a few top tips on how to conduct behavioural based interviews as well, and then we're going to have a look at some specific questions. So I hope that sounds okay. So I thought I'd start off with a bit of a definition, and you might want to add to it, Kevin and Christian. So I would say very generally, behaviour-based interviewing is a technique that can help us as interviewers to assess a candidate's potential to succeed in a new role. And what we're doing is asking them to provide examples of how they've handled similar situations in the past, and it gives us as interviewers a little bit of insight. And I'd say it's quite useful for candidates as well, because it's a reflective process that they can also have a think about what they've done in the past and how that might contribute to this new role. I suppose you'd describe it as telling a story that highlights the ability to perform a role well or not. So that gives us a bit of information to make a judgment. What would you two say to that? Anything to add?
I think that's wonderful in a nutshell. For me, the difference between asking a behavioural type question is it really gives the people on the panel more of a view of, did that person actually do it? Because you're looking at an example and they talk about that example, and you get more of a feel then compared to some hypothetical questions, which this is what I would do. You get to find out more about what somebody actually did, and that helps as well when you might be doing a scoring later on between candidates in regards to how they chose the example to give, which we'll go into more in a moment.
Yeah, I think I'd just add that behavioural questioning is a really interesting interview process. The answers don't necessarily need to come from a work environment. The answers can come from something that goes on in a person's experiences outside of work as well. So behavioural interviewing is not just for people who've been in a certain job for a certain length of time. It also applies to anybody who's applying for a job, from students all the way through, to experienced individuals in a work environment.
I think that's a really good point, isn't it? I think that helps make it fairer for candidates as well, because they're drawing on past experiences, wherever that might be, families, volunteering, other jobs that they've had. So what do you think are the benefits of behaviour-based interviewing?
Good question. I think because I've sat in on quite a lot of interview panels, and I think for me it really gives you a sense of the person involved, and also I think you get a feel for what they did in their previous role with the example that they give. I think that just helps, like I say, particularly me to sort of mark based upon what they say. And there is a technique which Kevin will talk about in a moment, but that's the sort of things that we're looking for when they're giving the examples of their real life experience. So that's definitely a benefit over questions such as, what would you do? It's best to give an example of what they have actually done.
Yeah.
Makes such a big difference, I think. Yeah.
I really like the real life examples, and it's an opportunity, isn't it, for people to shine, I think, without thinking about, what would I do? It's about what have you done.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you
Yeah, I mean, I'd look at it from an interviewer's perspective as well, and the benefits from an interviewer's perspective is that I look at this as saying it's like the extra 10% of an application. Someone who's applied for a job fills in an application form or sends in a CV with a long list of tasks that they've done, and that's sort of 90% of the process to get through to the interview stage. So the final 10% is the behavioural interviewing, which it sort of gives them opportunity to expand on things that they already know about, because it's them that's done it in the past. It's their experiences that they're talking about. So an interviewer can look at this and say, yeah, that is in line with what I already thought this person might have based on what they've already written. So it does make the interview process quite a nice flowing conversation rather than a tick list of tell me about a time when, or if you were in this situation, what might you do?
Yeah.
It flows better when we're talking about past experiences.
I think that actually that resonates with me as well, because sometimes people can put something on their application form, they're talking about it, and sometimes there's a bit of a mismatch, and you just think it's great because they've got through to interview with what they've put on there, but the behavioural interviewing, when you're asking about specific examples, sometimes it might not quite reflect of what they've put on their application form. So it's a good way of checking in if I was to be sceptical. Have they done what they've said they've done on their application form? Yeah.
And in addition to that, I think you can really assess soft skills more effectively through behavioural-based interviewing. I think as well, to go back to the conversation and the flow, you'd hope as well, like the benefit to the person coming to be interviewed, that would help them be more at ease, because they're talking about examples that are real life to them.
Absolutely.
So I think you'd get a more broad picture of what they're like as a candidate and what they might like, what they will be like working in your organisation.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's how you set the scene for the interviews to empower them to talk about their experiences and setting them at ease. So it's just more of a conversation. And if they've done it, you can definitely tell. And sometimes that passion comes through as well with the person when they're talking about how they've solved a particular difficult situation or worked on quite a large project that has really positive outcomes.
So it brings it to life a bit as well, doesn't it, for them and for us, and seeing that energy and that passion about something gives us that additional information. So I think it's a really efficient way to gather additional information. So you mentioned there, Christian, positive outcomes. So I just wanted to talk to Kevin really about this and about the STAR method. So we mentioned this right at the start. And this is a really useful tool, I think, within interviews, isn't it? But could you go into a little bit more detail about it?
It's a method to be able to, for an interviewer to be able to understand the process that they've been through in an example to help to identify the different behaviours and experiences that they've done. So STAR stands for situation, and this is like a chance for the individual to sort of explain what the situation was that they had to deal with. Task. So this is a way where they describe the particular task that they did, and that's an important aspect of this. This is talking about what I did in a scenario, not necessarily what we did as a team. It's my role within it. So what was my task within this? The A stands for action, and this is the important one. This is what was the action that I undertook in my example that I'm giving. And the bit that a lot of people might forget to do when they're giving a bit of an overview of what's taking place is the actual result of what that task was. So the R stands for result. What happened? What was the outcome? Was it a positive outcome? If it wasn't a positive outcome, what did I learn from it?
Yeah.
So STAR stands for sort of that 4-point process through giving an example. And it's not that you have a tick list and tick, yes, I've done the S, yes, I've done the T. It becomes a natural way of telling a story, leading through one by one. So you'd use it in all aspects of an application, from a CV form through to the application form, and also during the interview. It also helps to keep the answers succinct and to a point, factual. The skill's trying to get it across in a conversational kind of way rather than, as I say, using it as a tick list.
Thank you, Kevin. I think that's really helpful, isn't it? I really like the way that it comes through, though, from the application right through to the interview as well. And I would say as well, I think we've probably all experienced this. People often do that forget that last bit, don't they? The result of it.
Absolutely, that's the bit. So when you're an interviewer, you sat waiting for what was the impact of what you're telling me the story about, or what was it that you particularly did within this role. It's very easy for us as humans not to big ourselves up. It's very easy for us to say such words as "we did this" and "we did that." STAR helps you identify what my role was. So I did this and I did that. And as I said, if it's not a positive result, that doesn't matter. It's what you learn from it. It's about what did you get out of that process so that you did it differently. Yeah.
And anything that they say, that can really help the interviewer, can't I think, how would they work in this organisation? You know, how would it be for them? How would it be for us? So really helpful, I think, isn't it, that technique?
Absolutely.
And efficient.
I think it really helps as well, the people on the panel differentiate between different candidates as well, because if they are following that process about giving the example, what their role in that example was, and the outcome, it does help, particularly if you've got sort of 8 to 9 people you've seen within a day. It helps with that scoring process and think, actually that was a really succinct example. I can tell exactly what that person's role was within it, and they talked about what the outcome was, and if they go that extra mile, they can say the benefit to the organisation. So it's really good, and it's really helpful for the people who are interviewing to bear that in mind. So it makes it easier when you do see a lot of candidates on the day to actually just benchmark against each other, because sometimes it comes down, you might have 3 candidates and think they're all very similar, but then you can revisit those examples they're given.
Thank you, thanks for that. I suppose I wanted to move us on slightly to thinking about bias and behavioural based interviewing and how that might have a positive impact on bias. And it's not an area that I know a lot about. I know our EDI team also offer some advice on this, but I know you're both experienced in this a lot more than I am, so I just wondered what you thought the impact on bias could be of behavioural based interviewing.
If I was to sort of start to talk about biases, and I think for the university perspective, we do have a lot of training in relation to bias, and we tend to call it unconscious bias, but there is conscious bias and unconscious bias. There's a lot of good videos out there on the internet that talk about unconscious bias. And Christian, from my perspective, I think unconscious bias is about the decisions that are made in a snap moment. As a millionth of a second kind of aspect about how we determine what's going on around us unconsciously. The mind will make these decisions for us that we don't even know until we start to think consciously about what's being done. So these can be examples around how we meet people. You may have heard those stories about you can make a decision on a person between 2, 7, 11 seconds.
Yeah.
That's all that sort of unconscious aspect of things based upon our previous experiences. And similarly goes with interviewing. So unconscious bias, from my point of view, is very much something that interviewers need to be aware of. In relation to things such as the person who's in front of us, the age of that person, it's all the EDI things you mentioned, but unconsciously we'll make a decision on whether someone is similar to us. Are they the same kind of person? Do they have the same background to myself? Male, female, it can even go into, and so that's sort of one of those areas that consciously we need to be aware of and make decisions based upon the behavioural aspect or the evidence that's coming out to us from what individuals that we're interviewing are talking about. Similarly, from an interviewee's perspective, it's about telling the full story. Let's not expect everybody to know what's been going on in our lives, even though perhaps they may know us. It's about let's explain what that experience is. So unconscious bias is things that we don't really know is taking place in the back of our minds until we start to think it through. So once you know about unconscious bias, you can then take your time to make decisions. Don't rush through your decision making. As Christian mentioned earlier about we'll see different people as interviewers, So don't make a decision on the first person you've seen. It's like, let's benchmark about what we can see. And that's a conscious side, consciously thinking about what we've heard, who we've seen, and what examples they've given us. Don't know if you have anything else to add, Christian.
I do. I guess I've got an example, and it's happened several times when I've been on a panel, because I've been on panels for the last 20 odd years, and one of the things that comes up sometimes, not always, is the interviewee sort of gets upset, and sometimes, not all the time, the panel members, the interviewers, might struggle a little bit with that, thinking how might that translate into their role, and how they're going to manage. Whereas I always have a different take on it. Is sometimes they're so passionate about wanting that role, starting their career, moving into an area that they've been wanting to move into maybe for the last 5 or 10 years, that it's just hit them in that moment. And I see that as passion. That I think that's quite a good example of unconscious bias. So it's our experiences, and we all have different experiences, and whereas I might see it as passion for the role and that struggle someone's been through, somebody else might just see it more as, well, how's that person going to then, how's that going to work in the role if this person gets upset quite easy. And it's happened, like I say, about 3 times over the last 20 years. But it's just a little example.
Well, that really highlights it, doesn't it? The thing that I really love about the university as well, when it comes to interviewing, is that there's a chair, isn't there? That is there to be. I always think of that role as you're sort of the advocate for the person that's being interviewed. So everybody that comes in, each interviewee, you are there to make sure that they get a fair interview. And that's quite a nice role to step into, I think, isn't it? And it's a fair role, and it also gives the university, I think, it gives them a good reputation. People come away. I know when I came for one interview here, and I didn't get the job, but I thought I'd had a really fair interview, and the chair was really helpful. And I really like that, because you're kind of an advocate for them all getting a fair hearing at that, and the opportunity to highlight their skills and their talents and their experiences. So I really like that, and the fact that every chair has to go on a training course, don't they? Around bias, unconscious bias. And I think the other thing that I wanted to say about that is that, if there are any questions or worries that people have got when they're going to interview, they can always talk to us, or they can talk to the EDI staff as well, can't they? Who are really experienced in this.
I think that is a really good thing that the university does, is the chair, and the chair is somebody who's not within that school or service, so they'll not know about those particular roles, for instance. So you are, in some ways, you don't have any biases, because you don't know about the role, you don't know maybe about the service. You're literally there just to help with that process, make the person comfortable. But then, as the chair, if you feel, because sometimes people progress from within, that can be difficult for the people who are interviewing, but also for the candidates. Like Kevin mentioned, sometimes the person being interviewed might assume they know some information because they've worked for them previously, or they've worked in one role and they're progressing to another role. But you always have to go into that process thinking they don't know anything about what I've done previously, and to let that out. But sometimes you might have people on the panel who've got some conscious biases because they've might have managed them in the previous role, or they'll be aware of what they've done previously, and that's why it's really good to have a chair, because you don't have any of that. You don't have any of that knowledge. So you can have some really good conversations with your rest of your panel members about what they saw, what you saw. And for me particularly, having a scoring grid really helps to have those discussions, like, okay, who's your top 3? And to be fair, I think I've only ever once had a different top 3 people than the other people on the interview panel. With the scoring, you normally get the same 3, sometimes perhaps in slightly different order, but the top 3 is normally the same.
Yeah.
And I think that really helps, because you're following in back of your head that STAR method, you're looking at the examples, and so you can then capture that with notes and have a discussion.
Yeah, I think that brings us quite nicely then to thinking about specific questions. So there is a bank of questions available, isn't there, for people to take a look at. But I think if we could have a look at a couple of questions here that might be beneficial. So Christian, if I could start with you, because you were talking about some of the questions in previous discussions, and you've got some great examples as well, hadn't you?
So I think one of the questions might be, could you tell me when you've worked as part of a team to achieve a particular goal or project? So that is a good question to start off with, about, could you give me an example of when you've worked in that team? And you're almost laying out that STAR method to achieve a goal or a project. So a really good answer to that would be to set the scene, the example, or as we sometimes call the critical incident. So what was it that team was working on? My role within that team was to maybe sort of lead on that particular goal or lead on a particular area. And then what was the outcome? So it could be, we were successful in putting a new strategy in place for something, or it could be, like Kevin mentioned earlier, even if it wasn't successful, you could say, well, we had 6 months to do it, but it took us a year. However, the learning from that was, and we're looking for that candidate to say, my role was, I helped with this, I was responsible for, the outcome was this. It wasn't done within the specific deadline we had, but these were the reasons behind it. I kept people involved throughout that. I checked in with the team to see how they was doing. We worked together to see what we could do different. And then after it did come to a finish after the year, we reflected upon that and we had a discussion, and we might do that differently next time. And I led on that conversation. So it really gives you a feel for what that person was doing, their role and the outcome, rather than, say, a hypothetical question which might be, what would you do in a role within a team to achieve a project within a certain deadline? That's all saying what you would do. You could get that from a book.
Yeah. And you see it online, don't you? You see questions online, like if you're asked about what would you do, this is what you should answer.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Definitely.
You can definitely gather additional information, can't you, as well, around how they relate to other people as well, which could be really important in your team as well. So it's not just about what they've done in the past, but also how they relate to people, how they got on with people, how they manage those relationships.
Absolutely. Yeah, because somebody who is giving the example, but then they're talking about how they interacted with their team, how they made sure the team was all right. Even though they're giving that example, you could have another sort of candidate who gives the answer. They're telling you about their role within the team, but actually you're thinking, okay, they seem to have done it all. Where was the team within that example? They were responsible for doing everything, and they never really talk about the team and how they brought the team together, how they sort of made sure everyone was all right. So examples can open up so many useful information. Yeah.
So what do you think about this question, Christian? What are your strengths and weaknesses?
It takes me back to the 80s and 90s. I have heard this, and I've been asked this many times before, and nobody will ever give you a weakness. They'll just turn a weakness into a strength. So they'll just say, oh, well, I take on too much, or I often, work late because I'm really passionate about getting the job done in time. So they don't really say, well, I'm rubbish at time management. what's the point in asking it?
It's a bit of a waste of time, isn't it?
It's a bit old school.
Yeah. There's more effective ways to do it, isn't there, through behavioural based questions.
I didn't get a job once because it was for blankety blank company, and they asked, what would your manager say your strengths and weaknesses are? And I just said, you'd have to ask my manager. I didn't get the job. Actually, I didn't want it.
You didn't want it,
I didn't want it because I thought, what a silly question.
I think that's a really good point, that when you start being asked silly questions, it starts to give you an impression about who you're going to be going to work for and whether they actually do appreciate the person that you are.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point.
It's a good point for interviewers, isn't it? That actually we're being assessed as well when we're interviewing. You know?
Yeah. It is that. It's a two-sided conversation, isn't it? And at the end of the day, the interviewee, the person who's there for that job, will also be making an unconscious biased decision about whether they like the people that they're going to be working for. So, as interviewers at the university, we need to be showing that we know what we're talking about. Yeah. We know that we're asking the right questions, and we're getting the best out of the person that sat down in front of us. Because sometimes these interviews can only be 20 to 30 minutes long, so it's a difficult thing to make that decision in such a short time.
Yeah. And I think if you are asking behavioural interviewing and getting examples, you will then automatically see the strengths of that person through what they're telling you, and development areas. So if they're saying what didn't work, but how are they going to do it different next time, that's a development area. I would never really personally talk about weaknesses, because it's all about what you've learnt along the way and how can you do something different next time.
Just seems out of time, doesn't it, to ask those questions. So I just wanted to mention a few resources that are available, but you do have to do the unconscious bias training, don't you, if you're going to be chairing an interview. You can talk to Christian or Kevin or myself, although Christian and Kevin know a lot more about this than me. You can review the bank of behavioural questions as well. And we'll also have a PowerPoint which covers some of the stuff that we've talked about today, but also is available if you prefer a visual format as well. And there's also the EDI team as well. And also staff in HR who are really helpful around interviewing. So I think those are some of the resources as well. So is there anything that you two wanted to add before I round up?
I think I'd just like to add a little bit about don't be afraid to probe. Behavioural interviewing is very much about an individual's examples of what's taking place. Christian's mentioned about making sure that we've got the scoring sheet, and the scoring sheet links to your overarching question. Tell me about a time when you've shown leadership skills. That's your number one question that each panel will ask of the person being interviewed. I'm sure if people know that. Some people are afraid to ask another question, afraid to probe more, afraid to get that star or that result out. So as long as we are being fair in the initial question, we're asking everybody that same question, then it becomes an individual's example of what has happened. So I'd just like to add that during my interviews, when I've taken the chairing role, if you want to know more, ask more as an interviewer.
Oh, I think that's really helpful, sort of giving people permission to ask a bit more. Because you think, I've got these questions, perhaps that's all I can ask. So, that's really helpful.
I would second that, because sometimes some interview will automatically give you all the information. Others you might have to probe, and sometimes you may probe, but they still don't answer or get that sort of what you're asking. And that's okay, but at least you've gave everybody the opportunity by asking the same questions and probing people a bit more. But like you say, Helen, our HR department is fantastic. They've got lots of experience, so you're never really alone when it comes to interviewing. And there's the learn upon modules, as you've mentioned. There's recruitment and selection and unconscious bias, and those are the ones that you're asked to do if you're on a panel. Anyway, so there's lots of resources, lots of people to talk about. So if you ever are wondering about what to ask, you can go to the bank of questions, or you can just ask people in HR or people in organisational development.
Don't be afraid to ask is the key message, isn't it? So I just wanted to round up. It's a really interesting discussion, I think, isn't it? And this is the way that the university is moving forwards in terms of interviewing, so behaviour-based interviewing. So just to round up some of the benefits, we can use it to determine someone's skills, personalities, capabilities, but we can also use it for so much more, can't we? Because we're getting some insight into candidates and how they might have handled a specific situation in the past. So it's a real-world example. And like Christian was saying, you can bring that passion or that energy to those answers, and you can really get a lot from people telling you their stories. I think that for me is really important. It's around individual stories, and they can highlight how they might, how they've performed in the past, and that gives you information about how they might perform in the future. And I think it's a really easy way to gather additional information that's going to help you to make a decision about somebody, and to also to assess their soft skills as well. So it's a really, being on an interview panel we're very privileged to be in that position, aren't we? And I think
Absolutely.
It's a role, it's one we should take really seriously and step into, shouldn't we? And lead ourselves, I suppose, in making sure that the candidates get a fair go at telling their experience to us, and that we listen fairly. So that, I suppose, that's the other important side to it. But I just wanted to say thank you to you, Kevin, and to you, Christian, for sharing your experiences, and I know that that'll be really helpful for the staff here. So thank you very much.
And thank you to you, Helen, for
Absolutely.
hosting.
Thank you, Helen.
You're very welcome. You are welcome here any time for a cup of tea and a biscuit.